Good evening, Sir Colin. Today, we're going to present our video presentation in math,
which is
Box and whisker, histogram, and QQ plot. So let's start.
So sa among video presentation, amo ipakita if unsa na mo pagkalkyo ang QQ plot, box and whisker, and histogram. So and before na mo ipakita, amo san ikuan kung unsa na ang sila nga graph ang katong kuan, box and whisker, QQ plot, and histogram. So table of contents, ang histogram kay na siya tulo ka types: left skewed histogram, right skewed histogram, and normal histogram. Then ang QQ plot kay left skewed QQ plot and right skewed QQ plot. Then what is a histogram? Histogram is a type of a graphical representation used in statistics to show the distribution of numerical data. It looks like somewhat like a bar chart, but unlike bar graphs, which are used for categorical data, histograms are designed for continuous data, grouping into logical ranges, which are also known as bins. A histogram helps in visualizing the distribution of the data across a continuous interval or period, which makes the data more understandable and also highlights the trends and patterns.
What is an QQ plot? A QQ plot, short for quantile-quantile plot, is used to assess whether or not a set of data potentially came from some theoretical distribution. In most cases, this type of plot is used to determine whether or not a set of data follows a normal distribution. As a rule of thumb, the more that the points in a QQ plot lie on a straight diagonal line, the more normally distributed the data. Conversely, the more that the points deviate from a straight diagonal line, the less normally distributed the data. It is important to note that a QQ plot doesn't represent a formal statistical test to check for normality. It is a box and whisker plot. A box plot, sometimes called a box and whisker plot, provides a snapshot of your continuous variables distribution. They play a particularly excel at comparing the distributions of groups within your dataset. A box plot displays a ton of information in a simplified format. Analysts frequently use them during exploratory data analysis because they display your dataset's central tendency and skewness and spread, as well as highlighting outliers. Box plots truly shine when comparing data distributions across different groups. Their compact design offers a neat summary of data, making it a breeze to compare distributional properties of the groups through the positioning of box and whisker markings.
So naanay tulo ka book types ang histogram. First of all, we got left-skewed histogram. A left-skewed histogram is a chart that shows a distribution of values with a tail on the left side and a peak on the right side. Next, we got right-skewed histogram. A histogram is typically right-skewed when there is a limit on the minimum possible value, but no limit on the maximum possible value. Napunta normal histogram. A bell-shaped curve known as a normal distribution or Gaussian distribution is a symmetrical probability distribution in statistics. It represents a graph where the data clusters around the mean with the highest frequency in the center and decreases gradually towards the tails. Muna to itulo na to ka part sa histogram. Next, we got two types of QQ plot. So, first, we got left-skewed QQ plot. A left-skewed QQ plot indicates that the distribution has a longer tail to its left. If the dots form a curve on the plot, it suggests that the sample data are skewed and have more extreme values than a normal distribution in the tails. Next, we got right-skewed plot, QQ plot. From the plot, we can see that the points mostly fall along a straight diagonal line with some minor deviations along each of the tails based on this plot. We can safely assume that this dataset is normally distributed.
So the English histogram shows the distribution of English scores. Most students scored between 88 and 94, with the highest frequency around 94. Fewer students scored in the lower ranges indicating a right skewed distribution with a strong overall performance. So the math histogram shows the distribution of math scores. Most students scored between 83 and 89, with the highest frequency around 89. Fewer students scored in the lower and higher ranges, indicating a more balanced distribution with a peak in the mid-range. The Filipino histogram shows the distribution of Filipino subject scores. Most students scored between 85 and 91, with the highest frequency around 91. Fewer students scored in the lower and higher ranges, indicating a more balanced distribution with a peak in the mid-range. The AP histogram shows the distribution of AP scores. Most students scored between 87 and 93, with the highest frequency around 91. Fewer students scored in the lower and higher ranges, indicating a more balanced distribution with a peak in a mid-range. The ESP histogram shows the distribution of ESP scores. Most students scored between 88 and 92, with the highest frequency around 92. Fewer students scored in the lower and higher ranges, indicating a more balanced distribution with a peak in mid-range. The science histogram shows the distribution of science scores. The majority of students scored between 85 and 92, with the highest frequency around 81. The distribution suggests the most students achieve mid to high scores, while fewer students scored at the lower end. The MAPE histogram shows the distribution of scores among students. The x-axis represents different scores ranges, while the y-axis indicates the frequency or numbers of students within each range. The histogram reveals that only a few students scored in the lower ranges, while the frequency gradually increased as scores get higher. This is a noticeable peak in the higher score bins, with the highest frequency appearing around the 90 or 100 range. This suggests that most students performed well in MAPE, with a significant numbers achieving high scores.
QQ plot for English. The QQ plot for English show how students score compared to a normal distribution. Most points follow the red line, indicating an approximately normal distribution. However, some lower end points deviate, suggesting slight skewness and outliers. The QQ plot for math compares the dataset to a English distribution with points aligning along the diagonal if the data is normally distributed. Here, the middle points follow the line closely, but deviation in the tail suggests non-normality. The right tail curves upward, indicating right skewness, meaning a few students have exceptionally high score. The left tail also shows the deviation, suggesting lower extreme score. Overall, the data is moderate skewed, with a normality score of 6/10, meaning it does not perfectly follow a normal distribution and merit well transformation for further statistical analysis. The QQ plot for Filipino show how well the dataset follows a normal distribution. The middle points align with the diagonal, but the tails deviate significantly. The left tail curves downward, indicating the presence of low extreme score, while the right tail flattens out, suggesting a limit of high score. This pattern suggests a light tail distribution behavior, meaning fewer extreme values than expected in a normally distribution. Overall, the Filipino dataset is moderately normal, scoring of 7/10 for normality, making it more normally distributed than the math dataset, but is still requiring caution and statistical analysis. The QQ plot for AP suggests that the dataset does not perfectly follow a normal distribution, while the middle portion of the data roughly aligns with the theoretical normal line. Both the lower and upper tails deviate significantly. The left tail dips downward, indicating a skew towards lower values, while the right tail curves upward, showing the higher extreme values. This pattern suggests a right skewed distribution with moderate deviation from normality. Given this, the normality score for AP would be around 6 over 10, meaning it is not completely normal but still usable for statistical analysis with caution.
The QQ plot for science suggests that the data deviates from normality, particularly at the tails. The lower tail of the plot falls below the expected normal line, while the upper tail rises above it, indicating some degree of skewness and potential outliers. The middle portion of the data aligns relatively well, but the deviations at the extremes suggest that the distribution is not perfectly normal. Given this, the normality score for science should be around 6.5 over 10, indicating a moderate deviation from normality that may impact statistical assumptions. The QQ plot for TLE suggests some deviation from normality, particularly in the tails. The lower tail falls below the expected normal line, and the upper tail rises above it, indicating potential skewness and outliers. However, the middle portion of the data aligns fairly well with the expected normal distribution. This suggests that while the data is not perfectly normal, it is approximately normal with some minor deviations. Based on this observation, the normality score for TLE could be around 7 over 10, indicating a moderate level of normality but with some deviations at the extreme. The MAPE QQ plot compares the datasets distribution to a normal distribution by plotting sample quantities against theoretical quantities. While the points follow a roughly linear pattern, in the center deviations at the tails suggests the presence of skewness or outliers. This indicates that the data is not perfectly normal, with potential heavy tails or asymmetry. Based with visual inspection, the dataset shows moderate adherence to normality, with an estimated normality score around 60 to 80%, though statistical tests would be needed for precise validation.
So last is the box and whisker plot. So each subject is represented by a different color, which can be seen in the legend at the top of the image. So first is Filipino, which is the blue box. So median is close to 90. Interquartile range, IQR is the box is somewhat wide, meaning there is a moderate variation in scores. So whiskers extend from about 75 to 100, showing that some students scored as low as 75 while others scored a perfect score of 100. So next one is English. So English is the orange box. So median is around 90. IQR is slightly narrower than Filipino, meaning less variation of scores. So whiskers range from about 75 to 100, similar to Filipino. So conclusion is most students scored between 85 to 95 with no extreme outliers. So next one is mathematics, which is the gray box. So median close to 90, IQR the narrowest box, meaning the students' grades are very consistent. Whiskers extend from about 80 to 95, meaning there are no very low and very high scores. So conclusion is most students performed similarly with no extreme outliers. So next one is, the fourth one is the science, which is the yellow box. So median close to 90. IQR slightly wider than math, indicating more variation in grades. Whiskers extend from 75 to 100, showing that the lowest score is around 75 and the highest is 100. So the conclusion is most students scored well, but some had slightly lower grades. So next, the fifth one is Araling Panipunan, or the light blue box. So median is close to 90, similar to science, meaning there is moderate variation in grades. So whiskers is extend from 75 to 100. So the conclusion is performance in AP is fairly stable, but some students get lower scores. So next one is technology and livelihood education, or TELE. So the median is close to 90, IQR one of the wider boxes, meaning there is more variation in grades. So whiskers extend from 70 to 100, showing that some students struggled more compared to other subjects. So the conclusion is there is a bigger gap in performance in TLE compared to other subjects. So the seventh one is the MAPE, which is the red box. So Median is close to 90, slightly higher than other subjects, so the IQ are wider than most subjects, showing a large range of grades. So whiskers extend from 70 to 100, indicating some students had lower scores, while others had perfect scores. Conclusion: some students excels in MAPE while others struggles. So the last one is edukasyon sa pagpapakatao, which is the green box. Median close to 90, IQ are similar to AP and science, meaning moderate variation in scores. Whiskers range from 75 to 100. So the conclusion is scores are fairly consistent with no major outliers.